Hey there, welcome back to my channel. I'm Cybersecurity Meg, and I'm super stoked that you're here. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you the exact study plan that I followed to achieve both my CompTIA Security Plus and CISSP certifications within about a 100-day time frame. I do want to put a disclaimer at the beginning of this video that I do have 3+ years of on-the-job cybersecurity experience, as well as a master's degree in cybersecurity, and those largely attributed to bolstering the foundation of knowledge that I needed to acquire these certifications. So if you don't have some sort of background already, this 100 days, don't feel pressured by it. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to achieve a certification. Really, the most important process about it is learning and enhancing your knowledge so that you can be a better cybersecurity professional. Regardless of if you achieve the certifications in 10 days or if you do it in 2 years, it doesn't matter. Go at your own pace. I'm simply just trying to provide the community with the study plan that I use to achieve it on my end. For the Security Plus, this was the first cybersecurity certification I'd ever taken. I used it as a mean to kind of gauge where exactly I was at in taking cybersecurity exams. Since I'd never taken one before, I didn't have any idea what to expect, and I was a little bit nervous. I didn't want to just jump right into the CISSP because honestly, I was extremely intimidated, and rightfully so, by the CISSP, so I didn't feel fit just kind of jumping straight to the CISSP without kind of dipping my toes into the water with what is considered to be a more entry-level cybersecurity exam, the Security Plus from CompTIA. I don't have documented what exact scores I achieved on the practice exams I took, and that kind of sucks because I would love to share that information with you. I know some people really like to kind of gauge where they're at compared to others. I will note though that for the Security Plus, this is a bit more accurate in my understanding. When I was on Reddit and I was comparing the scores that I was receiving to the scores that others were receiving on their practice exams, I remember that I was scoring fairly similar to what people on Reddit who had passed were scoring. That said, for the CISSP exam, do not compare your scores to mine because I have read just wildly different things where people are scoring terribly on BOSUN, but they still pass at 100 questions on the CISSP exam. So please don't feel defeated or lesser just because your scores aren't as high as mine, or maybe your scores are higher. They're not really indicative of how you will perform on an exam. That said, for the Security Plus exam, I first went through Daryl Gibson's Get Certified, Get Ahead book. I am much more of a learning reader than I am a video person. So I read Daryl Gibson's Get Certified, Get Ahead from beginning to end. I took all of the end of chapter practice exams, which, if I remember correctly, there are 20 questions about for each chapter. I don't have the book anymore, so I can't check. But I remember that I was scoring usually in the 90% of those end of chapter exams because I was taking them right after I was reading the chapter. So there was really no reason for me to not be performing well on those end of chapter exams. I did not take the full-length practice exams that Daryl recommended taking before reading the book. And the reason I personally chose not to take the full-length practice exam before reading the book was because I wanted to have the opportunity to use both of his full-length practice exams that he provides in the book to gauge my performance. So once I finished reading the entirety of the book, then I took the first full-length practice exam that's found at the beginning of the book. With my results from that, I identified my weak areas, the topics that I needed to review. I went back, I studied them, I pored over them, I discussed them with colleagues, I researched them, and then I took the second full-length practice exam that he provides within the book. That one's at the end of the book. My score, if I remember correctly, drastically improved. I felt much more confident because I knew that my process was working where I was identifying those weak areas. And because I saved the two practice exams until the very end, I was able to take two practice exams that are relatively the same difficulty and see how I was progressing. That for me was helpful. I supplemented Daryl Gibson's material by using Jason Dion's Udemy course, which FYI, it does go on sale. So if you see it selling for like $100 or something, Udemy always has sales. If you just wait a few days, surely you'll find a sale where the course is like $15 maybe. I didn't take his full course. Actually, I don't even think I bought the course. What I did buy, though, were his practice exams. And the reason I bought his practice exams was because they provide PBQs, or PBQ stands for Performance Based Question in the CompTIA world. PBQs are questions that are generally not multiple choice. They could be drag and drop. They could be configuring an ACL. It could be anything that's more of an action item or something that's not so straightforward, something that requires a little bit more critical thinking. I wanted to practice these because I had no prior experience. I didn't know what they were looking like. I wanted to know what to expect. And Jason Dion's Udemy exams allowed me to kind of get a glimpse into what I may be expecting on the real exam. So that's why I benefited from those. I believe there were 4 full-length practice exams provided, and they were each 75 questions. I won't lie, Jason Dion's practice exams were pretty rough, but I do think that they correlated pretty well in difficulty to what the actual exam was like for me. I know that I wasn't scoring very well on the first 2 of them. I think I was scoring like 65% on my first, and then it went up to maybe 70 something. And by the end, I was scoring mid 80s on his exams. My tip with those exams are to, when you're reviewing the answers, ensure that you're not just reviewing the questions that you got wrong. You also want to review the questions that you got right, because perhaps you took a guess, maybe you got lucky, maybe your reasoning for why you chose answer A over answer B was not correct, and your logic that you used to apply that application of choosing one option over another was not correct. You always want to go back and kind of drill into your head why exactly you chose one answer over another. You want to ensure that the reason you're choosing specific answers is the right reason to choose a specific answer. So don't just review the questions you got wrong. Always ensure to review every single question. That said, I want to point out that in my personal opinion, the Security Plus covered about 30 to maybe 40% of the content that I would be seeing on the CISSP exam. There's a lot of overlap between the two. The CISSP exam, as I'm sure you've heard, is a mile wide, inch deep. It doesn't have any performance-based questions such as the Security Plus. It is a CAT exam, which stands for Computer Adaptive Testing, and that essentially means that during the CISSP exam, that if you're performing well or not performing well on the exam engine is going to adapt contingent upon how you are performing. It's going to challenge you, or it's going to ease up on the difficulty of questions if it knows you're doing well. No one really knows exactly how it works. We just know that it's adaptive and it's not the same for everyone. The Security Plus material, I went right from passing my Security Plus. I took about a week and a half or 2 weeks off of studying just to kind of relax and calm my mind. And then I jumped right into the CISSP. And I want to note here that I'm going to show you all of my scores for the CISSP exam, like practice exams that I took, but a majority of the studying that I did for the CISSP was done through the Certification Station Discord community. That Discord community was what saved me, and it's what helped me pass the exam. I would not have been able to have passed the exam if it weren't for that Discord. There's so many free resources on the Discord. It's 24/7 of people constantly asking questions to each other, explaining answers to CISSP questions, discussing the harder topics like IPsec or encryption, kind of the more difficult things. This is where I really kind of found my grounding and my footing on what was going to help me pass the exam. But let's get right into what you're here for. Here are the CISSP practice exam scores and question counts that I'm happy to show you. So this is just a note from my phone enlarged. I like to keep notes. I'm one of those people, whatever. At the top here, I kind of have noted off the different resources that I was wanting to use to go over some of the material outside of the books. So I was a large fan of the destination certification videos on YouTube. Rob Witcher, he provides mind maps. So basically he'll take a large topic and then break it down into smaller portions. It makes it a lot more digestible and understandable. I really enjoyed those. I did do the NIST in ISO memorization for the specific numbers. I made flashcards. I made over 800 flashcards between the Security Plus and CISSP, which sounds extremely extensive. And you're probably like, Meg, the CISSP isn't a memorization exam. You're right, it's not a memorization exam. However, what it is an exam that is often based off of theory and understanding something. So the flashcards that I made weren't just a definition and a term, they were concepts and making my own mind maps on flashcards and writing down difficult material in a language that I personally found digestible and easy to understand. So I made over 800 flashcards and I used them every single day when I was preparing up until the day that I took the exam. Then I also use the Destination Certification Flashcards mobile application. You should check that out. I use it on my iPhone, but I assume it's also available for Android. I found it to be very helpful. I had a compiled list of some of the main topics that were repeatedly being heard about being on the exam. So I wanted to spend some extra time on them because they were a bit more prominent in people saying, yeah, I saw this on the exam, or this is a more difficult topic, or something to that sort. So I made a list and I ensured to go over it. I'm also going to show you, after I go over this, the literal list that I made of every single topic that I wanted to cover in depth because they seem to hold more weight of appearing on the exam. So now is the fun stuff. Here you can see which exam engine or book I was using, the date that the exam was taken, the percentage I received on the exam, and the amount of questions that the exam asked. So by date, I think I roughly started taking exam questions in early July. I took my exam on September 23rd. So it was about it was about 2 months of studying because I got sick in the middle of it and I didn't study for about 2 weeks because I was so sick I didn't have the energy to do so. But yeah, I did about 2 months worth of studying dedicated to the CISSP. And so for the BOSUN exams, I want to make a note here. I really enjoyed the BOSUN exams. I love their explanations of things. However, I found that people were getting very easily discouraged when taking the BOSUN exams because they only provide so many questions for Domain 2 and Domain 6. And if you were doing a full-length practice exam, perhaps you were only getting 2 questions for the entirety of Domain 2. If you got one of those questions wrong, you would see that you achieved a 50% score, which is essentially failing since you need to pass every domain on the actual CISSP exam. And then I would feel discouraged. And I'd be like, well, heck, I spent so much time learning Domain 2. Why am I performing so poorly on it? And the answer was because BOSUN only has an extremely limited amount of questions that they have geared towards Domain 2 and Domain 6. So please just keep in mind that and don't get discouraged by it. A very kind of argumentative topic in the CISSP forums, whether it's Reddit or Facebook, is about the quality and the value of BOSUN exams. A lot of people say they're too technical, too granular, and I tend to agree with that. I did find that the simulated exams tended to be on the more technical side compared to how I perceived the actual exam to be. So I would go back and see why I got a question wrong in one of the exams, and it would be something extremely minute that would be mentioned on one page in the entire 1100 page official study guide. And then I'd be like, ugh, and then I would get frustrated because I was getting low scores and I wanted to see higher scores to boost my confidence. However, you can see over time here that from when I began taking the BOSUN exams to when I took my last one, which was just 4 days before my actual exam, I ended up achieving like a 15% increase from the beginning to the end. So that was pretty good. It boosted my confidence. I see a resounding amount of feedback on Reddit that most people aren't scoring too well on BOSUN. So use BOSUN for the explanations of the answers to questions. Yes, it's good to obviously use the practice exams to test your knowledge, but use BOSUN because their explanations to why answers are right or wrong is so fantastic. That's the true value of the product. AIO stands for the All-in-One Study Guide from Sean Harris. I was using the 8th edition, and in this, it provided it's eight domains, right? So they have it broken down into the 8 domains of the common body of knowledge. And I was just taking the end of chapter exam after each exam and then putting in my score. So all-in-one exams are difficult. If you're scoring super high on the like full length all-in-one exam ends, which I do have it written here. You're doing pretty well. You're on track. So I think the all-in-one provides one full-length exam at the end. I broke it down into kind of smaller chunks because I didn't have so much time to sit through and do an entire exam, but I was trending to hit about a 77% on the full-length exam. And then you can see here during the actual all-in-one end of chapter exams, I was scoring anywhere from the low 60% in domain 4, which is networking and communications, all the way up to an 85% in domain 6. So it really depended. I really liked the way that the all-in-one exam questions were structured. I felt that they were challenging. However, I didn't think they were realistic to what I saw on the actual exam. So you can see the scores that I was receiving here. Now, the Sybex practice exams, these practice exams are from the actual Sybex practice exam book. So there's a dedicated practice exam book from Sybex and Wiley, and then there's the actual study guide that's from Sybex and Wiley. They're 2 different books. And I'm referring to the book that is just practice exams. When I first began taking these exams, you can see in late August, I was not scoring too high at about 71%. However, with about 3 weeks of studying, I drastically increased my performance and was averaging between about 87 to 91%. I will put a note here that the Sybex practice exam questions, in my opinion, are much more straightforward and easier than what I saw on the exam. So take that for what it is worth. OSG stands for the Official Study Guide. This is the Sybex and Wiley book that's backed by ISC Squared. That's the main study guide that most people use to study for the CISSP. It's broken down into 21 different chapters, and these scores that you see from chapter 1 to chapter 21 are my end of chapter exam scores. Each end of chapter exam was only 20 questions, and I will put a note in here that when I was taking these end of chapter exams, I was literally generally taking the exam right after finishing the chapter. So it's not like I was going back, 7 days after I read the chapter to take them. So of course the scores are going to be pretty consistently high because I had just freshly gone over the material. It looks like my lowest score on this was about 75%. However, I tended to average in the mid 80s to 90s throughout. So these are more official practice tests. In that book that I mentioned earlier, the Sybex practice exam books, they have full-length exams, which is what these scores are for, where there's 125 questions. But then the official practice test also has exams that are broken down just by domain. So if you take the domain 2 practice test, you're literally only going to have questions from domain 2. And I really thought that these practice tests that were geared towards one specific domain were extremely helpful because it allowed me to identify which domain I was struggling more in. So I did these out of order because I started with the most digestible domains for me. Domains 2 and domain 6 are the shortest. So I was scoring, it looks like, really well, anywhere from 80% up to 91%. And these were indicative to me that I was performing well, right? I saved these until the last month. I wasn't taking these domain dedicated practice exams until the month of my exam. And again, one of the benefits of this official practice test book is that it has explanations in the back of the book for why for why the answer to a question is correct. So that's why they were really helpful to me. And then I took like I mentioned earlier, the all-in-one full-length practice exam. I guess I forgot to go back and edit in the rest of the questions that I took. When I add up these total amount of questions that I have documented in this notepad, it comes out to about 2,200 questions that I completed just from using books. Like I said at the beginning of this video, am an avid fan of the Certification Station Discord. I was literally on that Discord 24/7 whenever I was awake or not working, obviously. So I'm sure while I was in that Discord, people are constantly asking questions. I probably answered at least another 1,500 plus questions. So all in total, I'd say I probably answered about 3,500 to 4,000 questions, which seems to be in line with what most people or professors recommend. So it really solidified the basis for me, and it allowed me to kind of identify where my weak areas were and where I wanted to go. That said, here is another note that I used, and I wanted to show this because I found this process to be helpful for me. So this note is a list of things that I personally did not feel comfortable with topic-wise. Maybe I couldn't hold a fluent conversation with someone about it. I didn't feel proficient in the material. I was struggling with it on practice exams, anything like that. So what I did is I would make a list of what I was not performing well with, or things that I knew would be more than likely be on the exam that I wanted to ensure to go back over in depth. And I would just put an X mark here as I went back over them and reviewed them. So for instance, reviewing the different types of firewalls in domain 4, IPsec, and why it does work with NAT, some of the more physical security things, which I have no experience in whatsoever, so those are more difficult for me. The security models that are presented in domain 3, like BIBA, the Chinese wall, etc. And then I made a list of things that were solely memorization to me. And those things I wanted to make a list for because I knew I wasn't going to put that much time and effort into memorization until just like the week of my exam. Because obviously, you don't want to start memorizing something like 2 months out and then you don't touch the material again and then you forget it. It's just not worth the time for me. So I made a list of everything that would literally just be rote memorization for me. And again, I put an X mark next to it once I felt comfortable with it and crossed it off. I also made a list of the chapters or the domains that were more difficult for me. So personally for me, I found domain 4 to be more difficult as well as domain 8 because of their two domains that I didn't have as much experience in. And then I would make my little list here and I would ensure to go back over that chapter within the official study guide so that I could kind of review and enhance my knowledge. So that is my overall study plan for the Security Plus and CISSP. I want to kind of put another note in here that even though when I was showing you my exam scores for the CISSP, I took the end of chapter exams right after reading the exams. However, I made a point with having this list here of noting down the things that I was struggling with. That way I could always go back and refresh myself. I didn't just finish domain 1 and then never go back and review domain 1. I'd finish domain 1, move on to domain 2, and then go back and review domain 1. Finish domain 3, go on to domain 4, go back and review domain 3. That way I was always kind of keeping things fresh in my mind and I wasn't letting them lose sight. Also, I had a dedicated study buddy that I was using for the last month and a half. We were meeting almost every day to discuss on Zoom or over Discord about what we were struggling with. We were talking about our weak areas. We were helping each other because his weak areas may not have been my weak areas. So just always keep that in mind that you should find a support system to help you kind of keep going on the exam, to keep motivated. And yeah, that is my study plan. I hope you found this to be helpful. Please don't compare yourself to me. I just wanted to share exactly what I did to achieve my goal and hope that in some way it helps you achieve yours. If I don't get to see you until 2021, I wish you the happiest of New Year's. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic and safe time with your family and friends, and I'll see you next year. Ciao.